The air in New Orleans, even on a sunny day, carried the dense humidity and the unmistakable scent of spices, jasmine, and broken promises. In the heart of the Treme neighborhood, where music pulsed through the streets and history was told in every brick, stood Soulful Spoon. Its owner, Eli Vance, was a man who cooked with his soul. Eli, in his early 40s, had an imposing yet gentle presence. His broad shoulders, shaped by years of hard work in the kitchen, contrasted with the easy smile that rarely left his lips. His dark skin, polished by time and the heat of the stoves, framed eyes that, though tired, gleamed with an unwavering passion for cooking. His morals were as solid as the foundations of a Creole house, built on honesty, respect for traditions, and an unshakable faith in the power of food to unite people. Psychologically, Eli was a resilient optimist, an artist who saw each dish as a canvas and each ingredient as a brushstroke of his heritage. He believed that success was the fruit of hard work and authenticity, values he infused into every aspect of his restaurant. Soulful Spoon was not just a restaurant, it was a sanctuary of flavors, a gathering place where Southern cuisine, with its African and French roots, was celebrated in its purest form. Eli's dishes were legends: the seafood gumbo, which told stories of the Gulf; the jambalaya, which danced on the palate with the vibrancy of Mardi Gras; and the fried chicken, crispy on the outside and juicy on the inside, which brought back memories of Sunday family dinners. The success of Soulful Spoon was a testament to Eli's talent and the growing appreciation for authentic cuisine in a neighborhood that, unfortunately, was beginning to feel the first tremors of gentrification. It was in this rising tide that the shadow of Julian Thorne emerged. Thorne, a white chef of European descent, was Eli's antithesis. With his impeccably styled blonde hair and a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes, Julian represented the new wave of modern restaurants invading Treme. He was slender, almost ethereal, with hands that seemed more accustomed to holding wine glasses than wielding chef knives. His morality was a swamp of opportunism and envy, where cultural appropriation was seen as inspiration and ethics a mere obstacle. Psychologically, Thorne was a relentless narcissist, obsessed with recognition and power, and he saw Eli's authenticity not as something to be admired, but as a resource to be exploited and, if necessary, destroyed. His restaurant, the Elegance Bistro, was a monument to pretension, with dishes that were more sculptures than food, devoid of the soul and history that permeated Eli's every creation. Injustice was a persistent taste in Eli's mouth, more bitter than any pepper he had ever tasted. The consequences of Julian Thorne's defamation campaign were devastating. The once vibrant, soulful Spoon began to empty. The laughter and music that once filled the air were replaced by an oppressive silence, echoing with every empty table. Eli watched, powerless, as his life, his dream, crumbled before his eyes. He tried to fight, publishing denials, inviting health inspectors, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. The media, hungry for scandals, amplified Thorne's lies, painting Eli as a negligent chef and his restaurant as a public health risk. The community, once so loyal, began to drift away, influenced by the distorted narrative and the latent prejudice that Thorne had so skillfully exploited. The suppliers, once friends, began to demand advance payments.
The employees, whom Eli considered his family, were forced to seek other jobs. Each farewell was a stab in Eli's heart, as he felt responsible for their fate. The financial pressure became unbearable. Bills accumulated, bank loans were denied, and Soulful Spoon, once a beacon of hope and flavor, was forced to close its doors. The smell of spices and joy was replaced by the smell of dust and despair. Eli Vance, the chef who cooked with his soul, watched his empire collapse, his reputation in tatters, and his spirit, once unbreakable, now wounded. The years that followed were a wilderness for Eli. He distanced himself from cooking, unable to find joy in something that had brought him so much pain. He worked temporary jobs, far from the stoves and flavors that had defined his life. Each day the bitterness grew, fueled by the sight of Thorne's Elegance Bistro prospering, built on the ruins of his own dream. Injustice was a heavy burden, and revenge a constant whisper in his mind. But Eli knew that revenge, to be sweet, had to be served cold and with a touch of genius. He needed a plan, a new platform, a way to turn his pain into power. It was then that the idea of the food truck emerged, not as a triumphant return, but as a refuge, a place where he could cook again, free from the constraints and pitfalls of the restaurant world. The food truck, named Soulful Bites, was humble, but it carried the essence of what Eli had always been, a chef who cooked from the heart. He began serving his classic dishes, but with a touch of simplicity and accessibility. At first, few customers appeared, but word of the food truck chef who made the best fried chicken in town began to spread. Gradually, a loyal fan base began to form, people who sought the authenticity and flavor that only Eli could offer. They didn't care about his tarnished reputation or the rumors. They cared about the food, about the passion Eli put into every dish. And it was in this small food truck, under the scorching New Orleans sun, that the flame of revenge began to rekindle in Eli's heart. He knew the stage wouldn't be a fancy restaurant, but rather the country's biggest culinary competition. Soulful Bites became more than a food truck. It was a movement. Each day, the line grew, and with it, Eli's confidence. He reconnected with cooking in a way he hadn't felt in years, free from the constraints of fine dining and focused only on creating dishes that spoke to the soul. The simplicity of the food truck allowed him to experiment, innovate, and, above all, rediscover the joy of cooking. He listened to his customers' stories, shared laughs, and saw in their eyes the same passion for food he once thought he had lost. The community, which had once abandoned him, now embraced him with unwavering loyalty. They were living proof that truth, however long it took, would always find its way. It was on a hot summer afternoon, as Eli served his famous gumbo to a hungry crowd, that the news arrived. The Golden Spoon Culinary Competition, the country's most prestigious culinary contest, was accepting applications. And to Eli's shock and fury, Julian Thorne was one of the judges. The news hit Eli like lightning. But instead of paralyzing him, it ignited a flame he thought was extinguished. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to confront Thorne on his own turf, under the spotlight of the culinary world. The revenge would not just be for him, but for all those who had been silenced, for all the voices that had been muffled. Eli knew the path would be arduous. He needed to hone his skills, not just to win the competition, but to create a dish that told his story, expose the truth, and, above all, celebrate the richness of Black culture in cuisine.
He spent sleepless nights experimenting with new ingredients, revisiting old recipes, and seeking inspiration in the memories of his grandmother, a legendary cook who taught him the secrets of soul in food. He surrounded himself with a loyal team composed of Maya Johnson, his niece, a talented young chef passionate about cooking, and Samuel Sam Davis, a longtime friend and logistics master who handled all the details of the food truck. Maya, with her bright eyes and contagious smile, was the embodiment of the new generation of Black chefs, fearless and innovative. Sam, a calm and thoughtful man with large hands and an even larger heart, was Eli's rock, the unconditional support he needed. Together, they formed an unbeatable team, united by a common purpose: Eli's revenge and the celebration of his culinary heritage. The days leading up to the competition were filled with intense training. Eli cooked non-stop, testing every ingredient, every technique, every spice. He visualized the moment he would present his dish, the moment Julian Thorne would be forced to taste the truth. Cooking became his weapon, his voice, his form of resistance. He wasn't just cooking, he was telling a story of resilience, authenticity, and the undeniable power of culture. The flame had rekindled, stronger and brighter than ever, and Eli Vance was ready for the final battle. The Golden Spoon Culinary Competition was a spectacle of lights, cameras, and aromas. The stage, set in a grand hall in New York, was a melting pot of talent, where chefs from all over the country gathered to prove their worth. The tension was palpable, mixed with the scent of fresh herbs, grilled meats, and the nervousness of the competitors. Eli, with his impeccably white apron and focused gaze, felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He wasn't just there to cook, he was there to rewrite his story. Julian Thorne, seated at the judges' table, displayed a smug smile, his arrogant posture contrasting with Eli's humility. His eyes, once cold, now gleamed with a superior glint, as if he had already won the battle before it even began. He was the embodiment of the power and influence that Eli so despised. Beside Thorne, other renowned judges, with serious expressions and demanding palates, awaited the creations that would be presented. Thorne's presence was a constant reminder of what Eli had lost, but also the driving force behind his determination. The first rounds of the competition were a test of technique and creativity. Eli, with his experience and passion, stood out. His dishes, though rooted in Southern cuisine, presented a touch of innovation and sophistication that surprised the judges. He prepared a smoked duck gumbo with wild rice, a reinterpretation of a classic that brought the complexity of Louisiana flavors to a new level. The aroma of the smoke mingled with that of the dark roux, creating an olfactory symphony that hypnotized. In another round, he presented fried chicken with a spiced crust and a sweet and sour pepper sauce, which was both familiar and surprising. The crispness of the skin, the juiciness of the meat, and the explosion of flavor from the sauce were a complete sensory experience. Each dish was a declaration, a piece of his soul served on a porcelain plate. Thorne, in turn, tried to disguise his surprise and growing irritation. He expected a broken Eli Vance, a chef who had lost his touch. Instead, he found a formidable adversary, an artist who had transformed adversity into inspiration. Thorne's comments on Eli's dishes were always acidic, full of veiled criticisms and insinuations about the lack of originality or the simplicity of his cuisine. He tried to devalue Eli's work, but the quality of the dishes spoke for itself. The other judges, though they respected Thorne's opinion, could not deny Eli's talent. With each round, the tension between the two increased, and the competition stage transformed into a battlefield where cuisine was the weapon and truth the final prize. The final of the Golden Spoon Culinary Competition was the peak of tension. The atmosphere in the studio was electric, with anticipation hanging in the air like the steam from a simmering broth.
Eli Vance and his opponent, a young molecular gastronomy chef, stood side by side, ready for the final battle. The challenge was to create a dish that represented their culinary journey, their story, their soul. Eli knew this was the moment. It wasn't just about winning the competition. It was about exposing the truth, about redemption, and about celebrating his heritage. Julian Thorne, with his piercing gaze and a forced smile, watched Eli's every move. He sensed the danger, the threat Eli posed to his carefully constructed image. With each knife cut, each spice added, Thorne saw not just a chef cooking, but a ghost from his past, a reminder of his own dishonest actions. He tried to maintain his composure, but the uneasiness was visible in his eyes, an almost imperceptible tremor in his hands as he adjusted his glasses. Eli, meanwhile, was in a state of grace. His movements were fluid, precise, like a dance he had rehearsed for years. He wasn't just cooking, he was channeling the energy of his ancestors, the wisdom of his grandmother, the resilience of his community. The dish he was creating was a masterpiece, a symphony of flavors and textures that told the story of his life. He started with a dark roux, the base of his famous gumbo, but this time he added an unexpected touch, a smoked bone broth with African spices, a nod to his roots. The aroma emanating from the pot was deep, complex, evoking childhood memories and the richness of Southern cuisine. For the main course, Eli prepared a perfectly seared duck breast with crispy skin and juicy meat, accompanied by a sweet potato puree with a hint of ginger and cayenne pepper, and a blackberry sauce with balsamic vinegar. But the central element, the heart of the dish, was a small corn fritter filled with a pulled pork ragout, slow-cooked with spices and a touch of whiskey. The fritter, simple in appearance, was an explosion of flavor, a tribute to subsistence cooking transformed into art. Each component of the dish was a metaphor. The dark roux represented the difficulties and darkness he faced. The duck, his resilience and ability to rise again. The sweet potato puree, the sweetness of his heritage. And the corn fritter, the humility and authenticity he never lost. When the dish was presented to the judges, a reverent silence fell over the studio. Eli's dish was not just food, it was a visual narrative, an invitation to a sensory journey. The judges, one by one, tasted the dish and their expressions changed from curiosity to admiration and then to deep emotion. Julian Thorne, visibly uncomfortable, picked up his spoon and tasted. His eyes widened and a flush rose to his face. The taste was unmistakable, an enhanced version of one of his own stolen creations, but with a depth and soul he could never replicate. It was Eli's gumbo, the dish he had defamed, now elevated to a new level, served with truth as the main seasoning. With each bite, Thorne tasted not only Eli's cuisine, but also his own hypocrisy, his blatant appropriation, and the injustice he had caused. The dish of truth was served, and the taste of revenge for Eli was sweet and unforgettable. The judge's verdict was unanimous. Eli Vance's dish was not just the best, it was a revelation. The molecular gastronomy chef, though talented, could not match the emotional depth and authenticity of Eli's creation. The announcement of Eli's victory was met with an explosion of applause and shouts of joy. Maya and Sam ran to embrace him, their faces lit up with emotion. Eli, with tears in his eyes, raised the trophy, a symbol not only of his personal victory, but of the victory of his culture, his heritage, and all those who once doubted him. Julian Thorne, pale and visibly shaken, tried to maintain his composure, but his facade crumbled. The truth, served on a plate, was undeniable. The media which had once amplified his lies now confronted him with incisive questions about his tactics and the authenticity of his own creations. Thorne's humiliation was public and complete, a bittersweet feast for Eli, who finally saw justice served. The Elegance Bistro lost its luster, and Thorne's reputation, once untouchable, was forever stained. cultural appropriation, once disguised as inspiration, was exposed in all its ugliness. With the victory at the Golden Spoon Culinary competition, Eli Vance not only reclaimed his place in the gastronomic scene, he redefined it. Soulful bites became a national phenomenon, with lines stretching for blocks. But Eli, true to his roots, did not get carried away by the glamour. He used his platform to advocate for authenticity in cuisine, to promote Black chefs, and to educate the public about the rich history of Southern cooking. He opened a culinary school in Treme, where young talents could learn not only techniques, but also the importance of soul and history in every dish. Soulful Spoon was reopened, not as a luxury restaurant, but as a community center, a place where food was a celebration of culture and unity. Eli Vance's story became a legend, a testament to the power of resilience, authenticity, and creative revenge. He proved that true cooking is not in the most expensive dishes or the most elaborate techniques, but in the passion, history, and soul put into every ingredient. Revenge for Eli was not an act of hatred, but an act of love. Love for his art, for his culture, and for the truth. And the taste of that victory, for him and his community, was the sweetest of all, a legacy that would be savored for generations.